to tonight's reading. I'm Sarah Byrne. I'm a writer and editor, human, and but most of all, I am a massive short story fan. So it's a privilege to be asked by Patrick Cotter and James and all the team to read. To introduce your writers tonight, Alannah Hopkin and Cathy Sweeney. And this event is all about celebrating their respective publications. So Alannah will be reading from her short story collection, The Dogs of Inishere, and Cathy will be reading after Alannah from her debut collection, Modern Times. So I'm going to introduce both readers and then we're going to have time for questions at the end. So Alannah is going to be reading first. She's going to be reading an abridged version of her story, My Heart Aches, a quote that some of you will know. This is her debut short story collection, but it's unusual in the fact that it's collected from over 30 years of writing. So she's certainly not a debut author. She's many books published, 2 novels, and non-fiction. She's written a lot of travel writing and on visual arts as well. She also was a distinguished research fellow in the Harry Ransom Archives in Texas last year, and part of that research is going towards her next book in 2021 from New Island, which is a memoir based on her life with Aidan Higgins. So I'll let Alannah take away, read from her story, and I hope you enjoy.
The story is called My Heart Aches. My heart aches and a drowsy numbness pains my senses. Sense, singular, pains my sense, as though of hemlock I had drunk or emptied some dull opiate to the dregs. Drains, oh come on. Okay, drains. 1 minute passed. No full stop. Emptied some dull opiate to the drains, 1 minute past. Drains to rhyme with pains, drains, remember? Right, pains, drains, drunk, sunk. Now I'm getting there. My heart aches and a drowsy numbness pains my sense, as though of hemlock I had drunk, or emptied some dull opiate to the drains, 1 minute past. And leasywards had sunk. Neither Fiona nor Francesca said what both were thinking. In the whole morning, Fiona had memorized only the first 4 lines of 8 10-line stanzas. Her father had promised her a £20 note if she had the whole poem off by the end of the summer term. 80 often impenetrable lines. He had learnt it as a schoolboy and still recited it on occasion as his party piece. Now it was her turn. £20 was a lot of money in 1965. Francesca's dress allowance was considered generous at £5 a month. Impressed by the magnitude of the challenge, Francesca, who wanted to be an actress and was used to learning lines off by heart, promised to coach her best friend. I will be your répétiteur, she said in her most gracious tone of voice. Shouldn't that be répétiteuse? Fiona asked, raising her right eyebrow. They were both confident of passing French O-level, but feared they would fail Latin, for they had perfected a method of cheating in tests by hiding the textbook under their desks and sneaking it out for a judicious peep, while kind Miss Malcolm's frail elderly back was turned. Failing Latin would be a disaster because without it, they would not be eligible to apply for a place to read English at Oxford. 'Tis not through envy of thy happy lot, but being too happy in thy happiness. Oh, for goodness sake, make up your mind, poet. Fiona was not a great fan of Keats in the normal course of events. She was more a Robert Frost kind of person, stopping by woods on a snowy evening. But her father wanted the bloody Nightingale, so Nightingale it was. They think I'm dim. They think I can't do it. That's why I must. It's not about the £20. I know, said Francesca. I know. She had seen Fiona's father look at his eldest daughter as if she were a mildly amusing clown. Fiona's father was the head of a large multinational company who mingled with the crème de la crème from the world of diplomats, bankers, and politicians. Tall and dark-haired, he wore waistcoats embroidered with tapestry, used a monocle, and took snuff. Once he gave the two girls a pinch of snuff each and laughed at their sneezes and weeping eyes. "'Tis not through envy of thy happy lot." Fiona was the piggy in the middle of a large family with 3 elder brothers and 3 younger sisters, and she was assumed by McNair family standards to be of below average intelligence. The McNair males were all barristers, with the possible exception of the eldest son, Christopher, who had just been sent down from Oxford. The less said, the better, according to Mrs. McNair. Their wives were well-read, passionate about art, history, and architecture, and formidably energetic, as well as being flamboyant but thrifty managers of large households. In the past, their daughters would have done the season and been presented at court as debutantes. But according to Mrs. McNair, now that there was no court presentation, only nouveau riches did the season. Francesca called an end to their second session. "Okay, Piglet, that's enough for today. 1 stanza a day this week and next, with weekends for revision and Wednesdays off. Then the 3rd week, we put it all together for a series of run-throughs and a dress rehearsal." Besides being piggy in the middle of her family, Piglet snorted when she laughed, hence the nickname. "Thanks for the Wednesdays off. I really appreciate that. Got to rest the brain, Piglet." There was one word in the poem that puzzled them. Francesca suspected it was Greek, so Fiona consulted Miss Malcolm. Miss Malcolm often warned them of the difficulties that lay ahead in the form of Greek, should they choose to study classics. "Hippocrene," she said, "you must be reading Keats." "I'm memorizing Ode to a Nightingale for a bet with my father." "Oh, for a beaker full of the warm south, full of the true, the blushful Hippocrene." "Exactly, with beaded bubbles winking at the brim and purple-stained mouth." "Hippocrene," said Miss Malcolm, "is poetic shorthand for the source of all inspiration. The Hippocrene was a fountain on Mount Helicon, sacred to the Muses. From the Greek, hippos, horse, and crene, fountain. Fountain of the horses, created, according to legend, by a strike of the hoof of Pegasus. The hoof of Pegasus. Used, of course, metaphorically. By drinking from the fountain of the Muses, the poet seeks to heighten his poetic powers. That I might drink and leave the world unseen, and with thee fade away into the forest dim. I take it that you are acquainted with Bacchus." "Oh yes, my brother is an expert on Bacchus." It was Thursday of week 1, fade far away, dissolve and quite forget day. The school needed flowers for the 4th year's open day presentation. Fiona volunteered her mother's roses, and it was arranged that she and Francesca would travel to the McNair home by bus in their lunch break to collect the roses. There was a long wait at South Kensington for the bus, but the girls didn't mind. To be out of school on a sunny day with the prospect of lunch with Christopher was a treat. "My parents like you because you speak in complete sentences," said Fiona as they waited. "So do you. I know, but they don't notice. They think I'm thick and that's that. I wish they'd let you try for Oxford. They won't, because I'm a girl. Girls don't go to Oxford. Girls go to Paris for a year to learn French and cordon bleu cookery. Then they go to Florence for a year to learn Italian and the history of art. I'm setting an example for the smallies. If I were allowed to go to Oxford, they'd all want to go to Oxford. And no one would learn cordon bleu cookery. I see the problem. You can laugh and be sarcastic. You've got nice parents who give you a dress allowance as well as pocket money and let you have your hair cut. Fiona was not allowed to cut her hair for another year until 1966, when she would be 16. It was a family tradition, according to her mother, handed down from the previous generation, along with Nanny, who made all Fiona's clothes, apart from her winter coat, which was run up by Mr. McNair's tailor. Fiona solved the problem by raiding the dressing up box, choosing a pair of elfin suede ankle boots and a jewel-coloured hand-woven poncho. With her long black hair, she blended in perfectly with the new wave of exotically attired youth who were starting to appear on the streets of London. The front door of the McNair's large detached house was on the latch, and long-stemmed roses in tidy bunches were piled on the hall table. Christopher was in the dining room, seated at a large mahogany table in front of a bottle of wine and a silver platter containing cold roast chicken. "What kept you?" he called. "I opened a bottle of rosé in your honour and it's nearly gone already." "The bus," said Fiona, directing Francesca to her place and pushing the chicken in her direction. Christopher, meanwhile, pulled another cork and filled the girls' glasses. "I take it that you are acquainted with Bacchus," said Fiona. The Latin teacher's question had already become a family joke, a welcome distraction from Christopher's uncertain future at the increasingly tense mealtimes. "Thought you'd appreciate a beaker full of the warm south," said Christopher. "Full of the true, the blissful Hippocrene." "Blissful," said Fiona, snorting, and Francesca laughed so hard she sprayed pink wine all over her chicken. "Blissful then," said Christopher, not at all embarrassed by his gaffe. "Blushful," the scholars shouted, holding out their beakers for more. Christopher offered them a toast. "Days of wine and roses." The next Monday, Fiona told Francesca the news. You know how proud Mother was of her new car. The green mini shooting brake with real wood on the back. A complete write-off. Christopher, late at night yesterday, full of dewy wine, I can only assume. Not badly hurt, just cuts and bruises and a gammy knee. Do you ever wonder why he's so accident-prone? Mother suggested sending him to Florence with a small allowance, something about getting it out of his system. So what did your father say? He glared at her across the table, glared like this, and he hissed, he really hissed, "You would make a remittance man of my son and heir?" As if it was something really terrible, the absolute worst ever. A remittance man? Yes, never heard of it before. Something to do with his being sent down from Oxford and the love that dare not speak its name. Remember last year when we were doing that project on Oscar Wilde? God knows what a remittance man is. I'd say we're on safer ground with the love that dare not speak its name. You know where you are with that. Now, back to work, take it again from the top. I cannot see what flowers. The fifth stanza was the turning point. Once Fiona had mastered that, the next three were easy. Darkling I listen, and for many a time I have been half in love with easeful death. And finally, the great unanswerable question, was it a vision or a waking dream? Fled is that music, do I wake or sleep? There was a court case pending and it would be ugly. In order to avoid the publicity, Christopher chose exile in Tuscany. He had always loved Italy, he explained to Fiona as he said goodbye. I am not running away from anything. I'm running towards a new life with Stephen. We are going to farm saddleback pigs and grow herbs in the Tuscan hills, far from the weariness, the fever, and the fret. Here, where men sit and hear each other groan, where palsy shakes a few last sad grey hairs. Sad last, get it right. She walked away, hoping he had not seen the tears in her eyes. A week later, during a house party at the McNair's country estate, after dinner, Fiona recited all 8 stanzas of Ode to a Nightingale, loudly and clearly, word perfect. She had wanted Francesca to be there, but her mother explained apologetically that because Christopher had already left for Italy, an extra female at table had not suited the placement. Her 3 younger sisters, who had been watching from the minstrel's gallery, clapped their hands at the familiar last line, startling some of the guests who had struggled to stay awake during the long recitation. Her father shook her hand and smiled at her, scrutinizing her face briefly through his monocle, as if for the first time. The next morning, Fiona found a £20 note in an envelope under her napkin ring. On Monday, she would deposit it in her post office savings account and forget about it for several years. It didn't matter. The project had been a failure. She had not convinced her father that she was brilliant. Oxford was out of the question. There was no point in even asking. She knew that because of the words she had overheard the night before as her father replied to a guest's comment. Yes, lucky girl, Fiona. She has the McNair knack of memorizing poetry. Her party piece will come in very useful in Paris next year. Lucky, not clever. As she left the breakfast table, she dreamt of Oxford for one last time. Then, in a spirit of fact, not of self-pity, she resigned herself to her fate, consoling herself as she would do so often in the years to come, with the poet's immortal words, "My heart aches." Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alannah. It was a very poignant and very humorous story as well. So it's lovely to hear so much, Keith. Wonderful. Look forward to talking to you about it after Cathy reads. So our next reader is Cathy. Cathy's lived in Wicklow. I found out before we went live that she lived in Cork, a massive blessing, and that she lived in Zambia as well, and that she's now living between Wexford and Wicklow. So Cathy's going to read a story called White from her debut collection called Modern Times. So this collection was picked up, and I know that Cathy worked closely with Declan Mead and the Singing Fly, and then it was published as well by I was going to say in a German accent, Weidenfeld and Nicolson. So she taught English for a great number of years at second level, and she's been published widely in very prominent journals in Ireland, in the Dublin Review, the Singing Fly, as I've mentioned, in Banshee, Tangerine, and she's also recorded some of her work for the BBC. A lot of her writing has drawn comparisons with Lydia Davis due to its erudition, its humour, and these non-resolved endings that often a lot of her stories in this collection has. And her short fiction, her next project will be a novel, which she's working on at the moment during this confinement. So please take it away, Cathy, and thank you.
Hi. Thank you very much, Sarah, for the lovely introduction, and thank you, Alannah. I enjoyed the story very much. So here goes with White. July was hot and I was sickened by upturned flies on the windowsill. I never finished anything. I started the dishes and wandered off before the countertops were clear. Flies ate the sugar. At night, I left half bottles of beer in every room, read 2 pages of a book, ran a bath and let it go cold, while something caught my attention on TV. I wore all my clothes and never ironed, so I ended up wearing silk dresses to the supermarket. The lilac tree in the yard smelled like old powder and the high-pitched sounds of children irritated me. Peter thought I was hilarious. He knows I am cleverer than him, so he loves it when I burn things or lose the car keys. Colour began to hurt my eyes. I pulled my hat down on dahlias and could not sleep in Orchard Green. When I told Peter I wanted to paint the bedroom white, he grinned. Some girl told him about nesting or some shit like that. And even when I told him again, no baby, he had a smug look that made me want to smash him. The hardware store we went to was huge, a vast candy centre into which we trundled, like ants following all the other ants. The car was sticky and my eyes were red from squinting at the sun. Peter ran around, throwing things into the trolley, smoke alarms and roll plugs. I found a man on a ladder sorting nails into plastic boxes and tugged on his trousers. Where can I find white paint? He came down the ladder, legs bowing on every step, and looked up at me. It was Johnny Ryan. I'd given him a blowjob once behind the sports hall. He must have ceased growing the day he left school. Hello, I said, trying to get on top of myself. How are you, Johnny? He mumbled something, but I couldn't tell if he recognised me. Peter was pushing a full trolley when we left the hardware store, and a huge container of brilliant white sloshed around in my hands. I painted the bedroom. It was satisfying, dipping the brush into the smooth, creamy milkiness and daubing it on the walls. I liked the obliterating smell. I found a Chris Christopherson CD under the wardrobe and played it over and over, stopping to eat only when I was starving, salads of beetroot, strawberries and mozzarella cheese. I ate out of the bowl sitting in the yard. After the walls, I painted the skirting and the pine doors and the shelves. I took up smoking again, but didn't tell Peter. At night when he was out, I stood at the back door and blew smoke into the sky all the way to Orion. When Peter came back, we would make love. He was gentle, never anything sleazy, and with his face glued to my neck, I admired the white walls and played song lyrics back in my head. Johnny Ryan was ahead of us in the cinema queue. It always happens like this. You don't see someone for years and then you see them twice in a month. He was with a girl much younger than me, a bit trashy with a good ass. His hands were draped over her as they headed to some stupid comedy. After the cinema, Peter and I met up with a couple we knew from the tennis club for drinks. She was as big as a house pregnant and kept talking about it, so I amused myself by brushing off the guy over and over to see if he noticed. He didn't. In bed, I grabbed Peter to make him hard quick and got on top, but changed my mind and told him I was getting my period. I loved the mornings when Peter was gone. I liked lying in the middle of the bed, guessing the day from the light behind the blind. Sometimes I read, but words seemed to sieve through pauses like light drops, spooling to heaven, never snagging. I thought of leaving Peter, but by the time I got to unbundling health insurance and who got the cat, I was bored. I got up to shower, or to meet a friend, or sit in the garden, or pretend to be working in the studio. Days rolled by like leaves, and Peter kept talking about holidays. He got frustrated and asked if I would like to be surprised. I tried pointing out the oxymoron, but his face was too earnest. So I said I'd give it some thought, but I didn't want to go anywhere. I wanted to stay in my white room. I thought of telling Peter, if I break now, I will be lost forever, but some things are never worth saying. My hair is blonde and wispy. I wear it short, otherwise it gets in my way. I wanted to dye it that July, a colour you could lick. I went to the hardware store for some red gloss to paint the deck chairs and saw Johnny. There was something mongrel about him with his small head and thick neck, good nose but sloping shoulders, strong body and splayed feet. His eyes levelled off at my breasts, which were bigger than they should be from my lanky frame. I smiled, thinking of his teenage cock. He had one of those faces you couldn't read. At home, I started painting the chairs out on the patio and knocked over the pot, drenching the limestone in redness. Peter said, "Maybe you should go back to work." He looked older, as if the last time I had seen him was in a photo from a few years ago. I told him I was working, that I had ideas for a new project, that to be fertile you have to be fallow, that he could never understand the creative process. I heard my words like dredge from the bottom of a canal. I told Peter I was feeling hormonal, and he looked at me in a meaningful way. The next time I went to the hardware store, I was driving back from tennis and I got an urge to see Johnny. I looked good in the car mirror and there was a sheen of sweat on my legs. He wasn't there, and I wandered around like one of those women who shop all day to stay out of the house, picking up styrofoam cornices and putting them down again. I bought a bed for the cat that you clip onto a radiator. When I got home, Peter and I had a row about the cat. I said it shouldn't always be me who fed the cat. It was his cat too. He shouted at me, "For fuck's sake, Stella, you've nothing else to do." I pretended to be upset and lay on the couch with a fleece blanket over me. I was laughing at an old episode of Frasier when Peter came in. He stood in the gloom of the TV, flickering before me. Words fell from his mouth and gathered under the couch with the dust, while I listened to Frasier espousing the merits of freshly ground coffee beans. We made love that night and Peter kissed my hair, telling me over and over how much he loved me. When I came, Johnny was pushing the back of my head hard onto his cock. In the middle of the month, Peter's parents arrived. They were en route to a cruise and stopped off for a few days. I liked Martha, Peter's mother. She was sweet. But Bill, his father, had that whole paterfamilias thing going on, annoying but sexy in its own way. He'd say, "I hope you know how to treat a lady like Stella, son." And then he'd wink. Martha acted like he was a naughty schoolboy, even when he soured the mood by drinking too much and getting tricky. Peter loved his parents and was grateful to me for being likable. On the third day, I hit the wine too hard at lunch and something started jumping in me, a hot scratch I had to itch. "Bill," I said, "did you ever kill a man?" "What do you mean, young lady?" He semicircled his drink across his chest. "In Korea, weren't you in Korea? I mean, if somebody puts on a uniform and takes up a gun, aren't they prepared to kill someone?" I looked around at Martha and Peter. They looked like we were discussing shooting clay pigeons. I had to keep going. There wasn't any way back. I mean, there's all this bullshit about civilization and so on. But if some guy put a Kalashnikov to your door, it's fuck civilization. Am I right? The silence drove me on. Some loser wants to rape your wife. It's not green politics then or who does the hoovering. You want a man. You want someone who can fuck someone up. Am I right, Bill? You're right. He was holding his scotch into his chest now, like a baby. And that's what women need to know. He was shaking. Women need to know that what's what when the shit comes down. I thrust my glass to the centre. Cheers to that, Bill. I almost bent it. I went out to the hall and rummaged in the drawer for the car keys. Peter came out, shutting the lounge door quietly behind him. I said I'd been sipping the same glass all night and needed to pick up materials for a piece I was working on. Peter had a childish reverence for anything to do with my work. He was wearing a white shirt and I noticed how crisp it was. Martha must have ironed it for him. I drove over the limit with some classic rock station playing full blast. Johnny was sitting at one of the tills, but there were no customers. I walked up to him like I was going to order a margarita. I told him about my parents-in-law being over and my husband being such a straight and how I needed to buy a barbecue. He was grinning like he had just remembered me. "Are those Marlboro in your pocket?" I said. "Or are you just pleased to see me?" He cracked up and so did I. "Do you want one?" He checked his watch. "I've got a break coming up." "Sure," I said. The yard behind the store was enclosed and the concrete was damp from never feeling sun and mashed cigarette butts were spread out all over it. The first pull was good and we talked about school and how life's never what you expect. I talked more than him, but the first pause was like a black hole. Nothing filled it. He put his hand to my head. I think he called me doll. His jeans were cheap and fell away when I opened the belt. His cock was springy and cut off the airways at the back of my throat until I got the hang of it. Everything had a rhythm about it, like death. When he pulled out, I jolted. His hands were those of a too-strong puppy, and I nearly laughed at their playfulness until I got the picture. He twisted me back onto the wall, each vertebra jarring against the rough brick, one arm across my chest, the other digging between my thighs. No way, Johnny, get the fuck off, but he was already in. It felt like mercury seeping up through me, and all the time he panted into my face with his big, wet tongue. I don't use birth control. It makes me moody. Peter wears a condom, and I prefer it that way. Anyway, no mess afterwards. Outside, the sky brooded like a vision of the Mururoa Atoll. I had left the car radio on, and Jim Morrison was singing Light My Fire. I turned it off, put the heat on full, and drove out onto the ring road. I had a desire to keep moving. No lights, no turns, just straight road. White walls and the way the light fell in the bedroom in the morning almost made me cry. I rolled down the window to get rid of the sour milk smell. In school, Johnny was in the dud class. Girls like me used to score those guys for fun. Tomorrow, I would get a pill and flush him out. Peter would be a good father. Maybe I'd take a year off work and have a baby. I needed something to weigh me down. The light was draining from the sky, and along the highway, Kat's eyes blinked open as rain spotted the windscreen. At slow speed, the wiper sounded like someone giving head. Each time I looked, the clock had moved, until there was nothing left to think about. Black road, red taillights, and line after line of white. Thank you.
Thank you. So I mentioned to both of you a quote that I read. It's by a short story writer, American writer called Emma Cline. I'm just going to read it out to you. So she says that the difference between a novel and a short story is like the difference between surgery and acupuncture. One requires intense and invasive coordinated attention with life or death stakes, and the other is about subtle currents of energy. I just thought that was a really apposite quote to kind of open the discussion with. I wanted to start with you, Alannah, and also ask the same question to Cathy around your relationship with the short story over the course of your life as a reader and as a writer, and how those energies interact.
It's what I always wanted to write from when I was very young. But when I started publishing, the idea of publishing a collection of stories before you'd written a novel was absolutely out. So you had to write a novel to get published. And then I was told when my first novel was accepted, maybe after the second one, they'd look at a collection of stories. So that was why I wrote a novel when I really was dedicated to the short story. And the reason I liked it so much was because when I was growing up, my aunt, who was a reader for Alfred Hitchcock, of all people, used to get huge anthologies of horror stories and pass them on to me. So like from the age of 9 or 10, I was reading horror stories as if I could not get enough. And then that sent me sideways into perhaps more interesting stories, but also into Robert Louis Stevenson and Joseph Conrad and Thomas Hardy, the more serious sort of long story. So that's probably a long answer to a simple question, but
no, not at all. Thank you. I think Rope, one of Hitchcock's films, was a short story. So yeah, that's a really interesting and rich connection to have. And how then was it for you? I'll come to Cathy in a sec, but how then was it for you to go, I suppose, back to front to your kind of creative wishes? So then to go from novels and nonfiction to now the short story, because I know that you've been writing short stories over these decades as well.
Yes, I've always written maybe that I would keep 2 or 3 stories a year, maybe some years 1 or 2, some years none. But eventually, if you get old enough, you've got an awful lot of stories, and they've never been collected. But I did work very obsessively with them. I think the thing about a short story is you have to be obsessive to get it right. And it just didn't occur to me to put them into a collection. But you see, the reason I couldn't write them for a living was that you cannot make a living anymore by writing short stories. You could do in the past century. In the middle of the century, there were enough magazines like The New Yorker paying decent money for a story that you could sort of contemplate living from them. But when I started working as a writer, I had to write journalism and travel writing and other sorts of things, which is fine. I just love writing. And I think it's all the same in a way, whether it ends up in a story, a novel, a non-fiction book. The main thing is to get the writing right, to keep it true and keep it honest.
Absolutely. There's a wonderful Scandinavian writer, Dorothy Norris. She writes between Danish and Swedish, and she always said the appeal to her was that she could write about really awful people and then just have to write about them for 3 pages and then be done with them. So there was some sort of appeal to writing about objectionable people and then not having to sustain this held note over the course of 2 or 3
hundred. And I'm only now discovering Lydia Davis, who you mentioned in connection with Cathy's work.
Yeah.
I think she's wonderful.
She's so funny.
Yes, and she's fearless. And, she'll write 3 paragraphs and call it a short story. Fine. That's really good. So here's to the anarchists and the breakers of rules.
Absolutely. And that's where it's all happening. And to you, Cathy, about this energy that maybe you had obviously with your teaching and stuff, and how has it come about for you in terms of as a reader and a writer, because there are always writers watching these interviews as well. Is there any kind of pains, not just pleasures, but pains to the actual genre, the form of the short story?
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Sarah. I loved English at school, and I'm kind of the kind of person, if I like something, I just keep going in that direction. So I just went to study English, and then I went teaching English. And it never occurred to me to think of writing until I was well into my 30s. Just didn't occur to me. I think I was a natural born reader, and I just, reading, if I had to pick, I pick reading. I love reading. And I think that when I started with the short story, I think I was fascinated with the way our lives are dominated by stories, by narratives, and I think I wrote to get out from under my own story, and I think I'm doing that. The reason I read White actually tonight, because it was the first story that I ever finished that I thought that, well, that's a story, and I had it shortlisted for the Sean O'Faolain, so I just thought I'm gonna read that, because that's over 10 years ago. And then I just kept going, and as I got more, as I wrote more, I started reading more and more short stories. Prior to that, I would have read a lot of novels, but I am very much kind of, I would pretty much read anything. Like if my mother put down a Country Living magazine, I would read it. If my son put down, some politics book, I would read it. I love stealing people's books and reading anything. So I read a lot of short stories in translation, particularly got slightly obsessed with Russian writers. And I started to, to kind of just find a voice that for me felt kind of like cold, hard, but also had heart. So I didn't find, I found my way through by sort of, in some ways, cutting out sentiment. And looking for some sort of communication. I like that idea of just, I love Beckett. I love monologues. I love taking on another person's life and seeing it their way, and not caring about age or gender, or just telling it. And now I'm trying to write a novel. Sorry, I've been really long-winded, and I am learning the hard way that it's not as much fun. it requires a lot of patience, and I'm also learning how incredibly lazy I am. Lazy. I mean, I had no idea. When you're a teacher and you go to someone's clock, like, it's really easy to think that you're, kind of productive kind of person. But now that I actually am doing that, I'm quite happy to make endless cups of tea, get back into bed and read and read and read. So it's there, but it's slow. And I suppose the challenge for me is keeping the authenticity of it. I don't want to play the words like Jenga. I want it to always be right from the core. So sometimes I have to purposefully not write because I'm just not feeling it. And then, just when you least expect it, you're standing in a queue at the shops or something, it'll come back. So it's a kind of a very weird dating game myself in the novel at the moment.
Thank you. I'm going to stick with you for a second, Cathy, and just, I'm not going to say this expression deep dive, which is something that young people say. I said it, but I'm going to just go a little deeper into the collection. Not just white, but just throughout the collection, there is, I'm trying not to be Irish, but there is a lot of sex, and there is infidelities, and there are people who are, I don't want to be unkind towards the characters, but maybe some of them aren't very reflective or thinking people, thinking about their actions, but it strikes me as it's still a kind of a wilderness in Ireland to write so directly about sex and about physical relationships. And did that feel like a wilderness to you? Were you kind of looking over your shoulder, or was it something that you were like, well, this is absolutely how it's going, so I'm confident with that? Because there's such a confidence to how there's no sense of feeling shocked or feeling uncomfortable. It's just very assured. And I'm just wondering how it's not something a lot of people are comfortable about writing about. And I don't know if you remember the reaction to the adaptation of Sally Rooney's book over the confinement. There was a lot of So just sort of just around, I'm more interested in you as an author rather than a general opinion, but just around, was that something that you found easy to write about?
It's I suppose it's, for me, it's kind of like a hindsight thing, because I honestly never noticed. I think somebody forgot to repress me. I just never noticed. And obviously sex is a fascinating shortcut to people's souls, and that's why it's so interesting. I don't think sex lies very much at its core, and I didn't think about it. It really, it really amazed me afterwards that there was so much sex, and that people were that was of interest almost. But I think I just forgot to be repressed. I'll have to go back and work on that. I didn't have.
You need to teach classes. You need to teach people how to write about that.
Yeah. Bring back repression. I just missed it, even though I'm of the age I should have. I don't know what it was. My parents had me when they were both 22, and they were they were rebels themselves, and I spent my childhood not in Ireland, and they weren't Catholic, and I just missed that whole stuff. So I go back and try and get it. I mean, I found that the thing with the Sally Rooney was just bizarre, but I think a lot of people found that. I don't have anything more to say about it. Sex and death. What's more interesting, especially if you get a bit of death and sex in there at the same time. I never really thought about it. Afterwards, it became quite clear to me that there is a lot of sex in it. But I just wrote story after story, Sarah. I wrote them over 10 years. I would submit a story to a magazine. Some would get published, some wouldn't. Some were better than others. They have different styles. I didn't really think about, a book, and then the book came along, and wow, there's a lot of sex.
No, it's something to celebrate. But it's just that I know from teaching and my own writing, it's something that people struggle with to portray in a sort of authentic way. But I think I wouldn't call it the banality, but the dailiness of sex it's just really well represented in your book. Alannah, I'll switch back to you. I'm getting used to Zoom now. I'm getting into my stride. But your story is quite melancholic as well, but it feels very sealed almost. It just feels like a real sliver of time. Does that particular time or that sort of culture resonate with you?
That was me at day school in London.
Okay.
So for whatever reason, my father chose to send me to a very posh Catholic day school, where I met people who were immensely more wealthy than we were, and in a complete other world. And I found it very interesting. And the Fiona in the story was a good friend of mine, and she did go to Paris and learn cordon bleu cookery, unfortunately, and neither of us went to Oxford. But it just sort of came back to me when I was looking at Ode to a Nightingale and wondering if I should try and memorize it in order to you do these things to sort of freshen up your mind and whatever. And I thought, well, maybe I'll give it a go. And so I started, and I got into about 3 stanzas, and I thought, well, okay, so I can do it, but it's kind of boring. And then I remembered Francesca, sorry, the friend was called Francesca in the story. She's the me character, having learnt it, and I having coached her in it. And so the whole thing sort of came back. And while I was learning Ode to a Nightingale, I was writing the story. And the actual printed version deals a lot more with the verse and how you teach yourself to remember it and that sort of thing. But it's come out as being a sort of a story of the last generation, really, who suffered deeply under the patriarchy. And you did not go to Oxford if you were a girl. And that was that. Yeah. 10 years later, it was very different. But at that time, Francesca left school at just 16. Of course, I stayed on another 2 years, and so did the rest of our class. And some of us went to Cambridge, not Oxford. But so, yes, it's a kind of memory, but it's a memory sparked by something I was doing quite recently, about 10 years ago. So, it's part, if you like stories and you have this playful approach, which is what I like about Lydia Davis. Things happen and you sort of go, well, I wonder if I could make a story out of that. And you have a go, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Absolutely.
Very well expressed. And sticking with the kind of the pedagogy and the teaching, I know that you give a lot of master classes. I know that you're the resident short story writer this week, and could you tell me and the audience a little bit about how being a teacher of writing kind of impresses upon your life?
Oh, it's wonderful, especially if you don't have to do too much of it. I do very little, because there was a time when I did too much and you go stale. But if you do very little, it actually enlivens you. You get so much more back from it than you're giving out when it's going well. And we had our first session today with the group who's doing the 4-day short story course. And they're a wonderful group. There are 12 of them, and we're on Zoom, and some of them are in Malibu or other exotic places, and the rest of us are here in Cork where it's raining. But it's working out fine, and everyone's being very cooperative, and Zoom seems to lend itself to this kind of activity. And apparently we're getting a new, more sophisticated way of commenting on each other tomorrow. So it's been a learning experience as well. But yes, I love running workshops, but 1 or 2 a year would be the most I'd ever do. And
is that to do with just your energy resources? Is it?
Well, you come away with amazing insights. I mean, in one of them, I have a problem finishing stories or sending them out. And there was a writer in one of these sessions, and you get good writers too. You don't just get beginners. And she said, apropos of her own work, well, it's not going to get any better if I leave it in a drawer for another year. And I thought, bingo. That's why I'm not pronouncing them finished, because they're not going to get any better. So
Absolutely.
You take it out of the drawer, you pronounce it finished.
I've been reading too much recently. It's all clotting together. But yeah, I read a writer who recommended to leave them for 10 years. So I felt that was a bit excessive. And a lot of writers get asked the same questions in these kind of platforms and contexts. I'm going to put you on the spot. Is there a question that you would always love to be asked, but you're never asked, and that you might like to pose to yourself?
Oh, gosh. Well, not really. I should try and think of one.
No, is there anything that about your own writing?
Yes, well, I would stick up for the autobiographical based story. I think it's no less than the fully imagined story. I do write about other people who have other lives, but sometimes my stories spark off my own life and things I've been through that I haven't seen written about anywhere else. Maybe that's the key. So I think, think of Alice Munro. A lot of her stories are based on her own apparently not very interesting life in rural Canada growing up and then going to the city and having a failed marriage. Is that the material of a Nobel Prize winner? Yes, absolutely. So let's take that example and not be sniffy about people who write from their own life experience.
Absolutely. There is a sort of, there is camps around that, isn't there? Just around, and it's just become so much more popular to do it now. You were mentioning kind of the mid 20th century, when I guess it was people like, Nabokov and people like that featuring heavily in the New Yorker, where that wasn't really even entertained, that kind of genre. But absolutely, if the writing is good, doesn't matter how you get there.
Exactly.
And Alannah, you mentioned it. So Lydia Davis and Alice Munro. Is there anyone else piquing your interest at the moment, or that you turn to when you're writing? Is there anyone that you're recommending to your students this week?
I guess because I've been writing memoir for the last 2 years. The big discovery for me a year or two ago from another angle was Leonora Carrington, who's she was a surrealist. She's written some wonderful stories, very few of them, but they're really worth seeking out. And her story is available online. Leonora Carrington, The Hyena. Have a look at it. It will knock your head off.
Thank you. And Cathy, what about you? First of all, is there anything that you wish that you were ever asked about yourself or your writing in this context that you wish to share?
I can't. I don't think so, Sarah. I haven't actually done very many interviews or taken very many questions, but I can't. I don't think there's anything I want to, be asked.
You're not burning to. Yeah, I think I come from just a really hyper verbose family where there's always a queue of things to say. So, we're obviously, our listeners would be really interested in your next project. So is there, you have a novel, is there a timeline for your novel, Cathy, or is it just in progress?
There's probably a loose one, but I haven't, purposely haven't checked what it is. You can only kind of go at the speed you're going, which I think anyone would understand. But the only thing I'd say about it is, I think, to me, writing is very different to publishing and much more important. So I very much try and remember that and just keep my head in the writing. And the only reason that I even thought that I would write a novel or that I would even try is because I got the idea start to finish during a particularly turbulent month last year. And I suppose it just sort of segued with having finished the collection with Declan. and it just, so I thought, oh, like, I have this story, I have this woman, I know what happens, and I'll do it. Unfortunately, and it's like the least important thing in the world, but I was kind of method writing, which I love, which means I was like getting into my car and doing the stuff that the woman would do. And I was really having a great time because it was my first year of like not teaching. And I've had to kind of abandon that because of obviously the world that we're in now. You can't be floating around and drifting in and out of coffee shops all day. So I've had to kind of adapt it a bit. But I love that idea of, you know, just doing what the person would do and observing the world through imagining I'm someone else. I suppose, like, I never want to lose the play of writing. I do think I didn't write when I was young. I didn't write in my 20s or 30s. I read, but I played a lot as a kid, you know, with dolls. Like, they were like very elaborate games, and I like only liked kids who'd like play properly, do what I wanted them to do with the characters, dolls and teddies. And I do think that there's something about the writer that, you know, you've got the world you live in, which is like a kind of, we all have the mundanity of our flat earth worlds, you know, good times and bad times, ups and downs and all the rest of it. But you get to have another world, and that's what writing is about for me. You know, you get to be like here and somewhere else. And I you know, that's what you're chasing. I mean, a little bit like chasing, you know, the hit, whatever it is, drug, dopamine, because you won't get it all the time, but when you get it, it's worth it. Sorry, Sarah, I don't think I answered your question at all, but...
No, you did. You answered it. You made my question more interesting than it was. You enhanced my question. So, no, absolutely.
Very sweet.
And I know it's the dreaded question, and it's an obvious one, but it's out of concern and just concern for the writing community. But how have you both been coping through these past months since March? How have you been, I suppose, coping creatively?
Well, for me, I hate to say it because I know other people have suffered terribly, but it was very convenient to be homebound because I had a book to finish. And I'm used to living and working at home. I'm used to not seeing many people. So I was kind of thriving on it. And I'm not sure how I feel about it all starting up again, but certainly from March to August, I was working full-time on one book, writing and rewriting and liaising with people and doing nothing but looking at the laptop. So it was fine, but I do thank my friends who made me come out occasionally and visited me occasionally and made me visit them.
And how about for you, Cathy?
You know, I don't have anything particular to say about it. I am in, you know, a pretty okay, like this year, like was just about writing. As I say, you know, it's very slow and so on. The same as everyone else, the ups and downs. As I said to you, there's my mother who hasn't been well. There's the young adult kids, and you know the kind of world that they're looking at, and you're caught between you're understanding that like every person has their own thing going on, and different age groups have different issues, and like for me, nothing, you know, no particular hardship, but you're really aware of what it is like for a lot of people. Yeah. And I suppose I probably would have a huge feelings for young people.
Yeah, that comes across in your book a great deal, I think. Sort of a generosity of spirit towards them, rather than... I would have parents at the age who kind of hate them and think that everything they do and say is objectionable. But it's important to preserve that space. They're human beings as well.
Well, I think to be a young person, like it's an existential issue to be like setting out at like 19 into this world. I feel for them. Yeah.
And it's kind of like what you said about writing being this other space, this kind of play space. That's all inside of us. Like we were all young, you know. Like,
yeah.
So it's not Yeah, it's not a stranger we're talking about. We're talking about a body or a time in life that we've all lived through, So
yeah.
I think that empathy really comes across in both of your work. And just around, I love the idea of this kind of second space or liminal space between the daily and the writing. And just for writers or readers who are watching, could I ask both of you before we conclude, sort of what do you do to protect that space? So if you're admitted entry to it, how do you keep it alive, if that's not too cheesy a question?
Well, shall I go first?
Yes, go ahead.
I'd say have a routine and enjoy your routine, love your routine, and take plenty of time outdoors in the fresh air, walk.
Great idea.
Whatever you like doing outdoors. I garden as well. And the long walks, either alone or in company, I think are so important because you get out of the room, you get away from the laptop and the obsessiveness. And it is good to talk to other people. I do have to keep reminding myself of that.
A lot of writers forget that.
Another great pleasure in the last 6 months has been long phone calls with old friends who have rung up just to say, well, hi, I'm wondering how you were doing. And an hour later, we're still talking. And that's been extraordinary. So there's 2 tips. Get outdoors and stay indoors on the phone with friends.
Brilliant. And Cathy?
I think that I'm still such a novice because it's the first time, I'm only a couple of months into this writing full-time thing, or meant to be full-time. But I'm listening to Alannah and I'm thinking that's what I'm after, the routine. I'm trying things out and some things work and some things don't. But I do know that it will take a while after years of having sort of proper job stuff. It'll take a while, but I do think yes, routine, and I've certainly started moving in that direction, trying to just not be as lazy. And Alannah, I really enjoyed your book.
Oh, thank you.
Really enjoyed your book. So it was lovely to do this and to read something coming my way, that wasn't in my orbit, and very much enjoyed it.
And I look forward to yours very much too.